Hello, my name is Group Captain Ajay Ahlawat. I'm a former Air Force officer, and this morning I'm going to talk to you about an incredible story that unraveled over last couple of days. This is a story of escape, evasion, followed by a daring rescue. Those of you who follow the news would know by now that the American forces recovered two of their pilots right from under the noses of Iranian defenses. These pilots were shot down behind enemy lines. Here is what happened. In the early hours of 3rd April, an American F-15E Strike Eagle was shot down over Iranian territory. This aircraft, a two-seater comprising the pilot and the weapon system operator, was engaged in an interdiction mission. The shootdown triggered a chain of events culminating in the pilot rescue. The moment the F-15 shootdown occurred, the news reached the Iranians as well as the Americans. And then a race began. The race to find out the pilot. Iranians were operating under the advantage of home territory, but they did not know exactly where the pilot was. The US knew exactly where the pilot was, but they had to pull them out from a hostile territory. So basically, it was race between Iran and US, and the time was a determining factor. So there are two pilots and two parties looking for them. Iran home advantage, they don't know where the pilot is. US knows exactly where the pilot is, but hostile territory. Eventually, the pilot was located and rescued within few hours. However, the fate of WSO remained uncertain for almost a day. There are teams that have only one mission in the military, which is CSAR. They are specialized troops, they carry specialized equipment, they train for it day and night. So the moment the shootdown happened, the US forces activated their CSAR SOPs and CSAR kicked in. The primary asset for the CSAR mission was the HH-60G Pave Hawk helicopter, essentially a version of Black Hawk optimized or modified for a role of this kind. Each Pave Hawk carries a crew of 4 plus PJs. The crew consists of the pilot, co-pilot, engineer, and the gunner, and it can carry up to 2 PJs. PJs are the para-rescue jumpers, again, specialized Air Force troops. They do only one mission, which is to recover downed aircrew from hostile territory. To assist these Pave Hawk helicopters, there was one HC-130J Combat King, a modified Hercules basically. It acts as a gas station in the air and also acts as a command and coordination hub. To provide fire, a pair of A-10 Warthogs was tasked. Hogs, because they can fly low and slow and carry enormous amount of firepower, are ideally suited for a mission of this nature. Sitting on top were a series of, or a whole range of drones ranging from medium altitude MQ-9 to micro drones and everything in between. And also, to cater to some unforeseen contingencies, a pair of F-35 Lightnings were flying at 40,000 feet. So incredible amount of resources were devoted, and it looked, incredible plan of well-trained troops. However, there is an old saying in the military: no plan survives the contact with the enemy. So here is what happened. The Pave Hawk and the accompanying C-130s received enemy fire from small arms as well as some AAA. One of the helicopters was damaged. It had to land or crash land. The second helicopter was able to extricate all the crew in the first helicopter as well as the pilot, which they had recovered by then. The C-130 also received damages. However, it made out of the hostile airspace. The A-10s that were advancing Iranian ground convoy, one of them was shot at, and the hit did not cripple the aircraft. It allowed the aircraft to at least fly out of the enemy airspace. The pilot ejected over the Gulf and was recovered. Now, there are some additional reports for which we do not have the confirmation. However, the images and the videos are being widely shared on social media that the US forces landed at least a pair of C-130s in the desert, either at a disused airfield or at a flat terrain. They were able to find the VSO, recover the VSO, and in the process of exfil, when it became difficult to fly out the aeroplanes, they destroyed these C-130s on ground and extricated with all the crew. As claims made by the American handlers, including by the President of the United States, there were no lives lost in the mission. We will wait for confirmation to hear about the assets lost. Maybe we will never know. However, suffice to say at this moment, a large amount of assets were deployed. A large amount of assets were also damaged or lost. And also a significantly large number of lives were risked to save one life or two life. And that has triggered a debate on in the strategic circles, media, social media. Was it worth the risk? The debate raises one critical question. Was it wise to risk so much, lose so much, just to save two pilots? Was this decision to commit all these resources a rational decision or an emotional decision? To answer, let's consider the alternative. A live American pilot paraded on Iranian state television. It would be a propaganda coup of historic proportions, strategic defeat, national humiliation. Look at the crew. The F-15 crew, the Viso, was the rank of colonel. It would be an intelligence windfall for the Iranians. They would learn so much about tactics, training, procedures, and the rules of engagement, etc. It would also have severely dented the political fortunes of President Donald J. Trump. I wish we could ignore the politics completely, but we cannot. Politics play an important role in a war of this nature. As such, this is a war of choice. People back home would question. They are already questioning why are we in this war as such, and a loss like that would have given more wind to those questions. On the flight line or amongst the troops, it would have severely dented the morale. Remember, on 18th March, the Chairman Joint Chief General Kane stood on a podium and announced that we have achieved complete air superiority and we would be committing slow movers like A-10 Warthogs and Apache helicopters in an effort to open the Strait of Hormuz. The plan did not work out as planned. The A-10s are being shot at, the helicopters are being shot at. So a captured pilot would have added to that, dent in morale and confusion on the flight line. Now look at what the successful rescue achieved. Morale. It raised morale across the rank and the file. Young aircrew who are flying these missions are concerned about the cost and the consequences of flying into the harm's way. They get convinced now. Our military, should things go south, our military would move heaven and earth to get them back home. The covenant, no man left behind, the sacred contract, no price too high, was reinforced amongst all the combatants. At a time when questions are being raised about the utility as well as the futility of this war, even amongst the participating troops, long deployment, high operational tempo, they don't know when they can go back home, the strategic end states are uncertain and they keep changing. In that kind of environment, this rescue lands like a thunderclap. Look at the squadron, the Black Panthers. They would be in extremely high spirits. They would be ready to run through a brick wall at this moment. So those questioning the logic of risking far too much for far too little are literally missing the wood for the trees. It is not a simple input-output equation. Machine will be recovered, the damage will be repaired, the ones that are lost will be rebuilt, maybe a few months, maybe a few years. Reputation and morale, once lost, would take far longer to rebuild. Remember, if you read enough books, you would know American military took almost a decade to recover from the loss of morale in the Vietnam War. Captured pilot paraded as a trophy on Iranian TV would have inflicted a strategic damage that cannot be measured in terms of dollars. We can all disagree with the US for waging this war. I certainly do. I think this war is completely unnecessary. I also go as far as to say it's an illegal war. But in today's discussion, we focus narrowly on this incident, this mission. It was a brilliant mission, flown and executed by brave troops, and it speaks very well of their training. In the final analysis, US did not just rescue two airmen. It rescued something far more vital. It rescued the conviction that in the American way of war, the human element will always command the highest price tag of them all. They would pay any price. They would move mountains to bring you back home. And this is a force multiplier for American troops.